Well, g'day, it's Lyle Shelton here. Welcome to the Macquarie Street Political Podcast, which I'm rebooting after a little bit of a period of downtime. I wanted to bring this to you to talk about the issues of the week, the key things that have been happening in politics in Australia, the stuff that the mainstream political parties simply will not talk about. This is why we need podcasts like this. I've got a very special guest joining me live, and we are going live. We're streaming to Facebook and X and YouTube at the moment, and of course the recording of this will be available afterwards for people to watch. It'll also be available on Spotify, so you can listen to it when you're on your run or in the car or whatever you're doing. But my special guest today, in just a moment, is Tess Hackett. Tess was featured on the front cover of the Weekend Australian magazine last Saturday, and this was a massive breakthrough for parents like her who have been victims of LGBTIQA plus rainbow political ideology. She's lost a child to the trans agenda, and she is speaking there on behalf of so many other parents who have been devastated by this political ideology, which has taken their children from them, caused them to be estranged, and often to have gone through irreversible medical procedures, sterilisation, chemical castration, sometimes physical castration, in the vain hope that they can somehow change their gender. This is a huge, huge story. Tess and so many others have been trying for years and years to get through to the mainstream media, to create awareness in the Australian population, and this is a massive, massive breakthrough, and she'll be giving her first interview with us right here on the Macquarie Street podcast in just a few moments. But before we do, I want to talk about the week that's just gone in politics here in Australia. This has been the first sitting week since the Parliament went back after the May 3 election. And boy, what a week it's been. It's been a long break of Parliament sitting. We've had Susan Ley. She was elected as the Liberal opposition leader, or the opposition leader on behalf of the Liberals and the Nationals. And she went to her first question time this week. She strode into the Parliament with this photo that you can see on screen being posted on her social media. This is what my friend George Christensen dubbed the Charlie's Angels photo. It's Susan Ley, two of her colleagues striding into question time to, I guess, show this new face of the Liberal Party that's female friendly, because one of the wash-ups of the election was apparently this so-called women's problem, which the Liberal Party supposedly has. I don't know that media shots like this that are completely contrived and staged are going to cause more voters to be attracted to the Liberal Party, particularly women. I think they're looking for substance. I think the Liberal Party's real women's problem lies with this next issue, and this issue that Senator Alex Antic from South Australia brought up in the first week of the Parliament just a few days ago. Let's take a look.
Thank you. I rise to indicate that I intend to introduce a private Senator's bill to amend the Sex Discrimination Act by removing the references to gender identity and restoring the Act to its original purpose. In 2013, the Gillard government introduced gender identity as a protected attribute of the Act, and this changed the Act's intent, creating a situation where the safety, privacy and opportunities of women are now challenged pursuant to the very law that was designed to protect them.
Now, this is a really, really important move by Senator Antic. The Sex Discrimination Act, as he said, was amended in 2013 when Julia Gillard, our first female Prime Minister, was in office. Her then Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, changed that act to make gender identity a protected attribute. Now, what that's done is created a situation where if a biological male thinks that they're a woman, that biological male can have all the advantages and privileges and rights of a woman. He can go into female-only spaces, he can play in women's sports, he can go to their toilets, their showers. It's created this incredible vulnerability for girls and women. And it's something that should have been fixed a long, long time ago. It's something that people like Alex Antic and Senator Claire Chandler, parties like Family First, of which I'm the National Director, Pauline Hanson to her credit, they've been raising this issue over and over again, and yet no one in politics will take any notice. Now, if Susan Ley was serious about fixing the Liberal Party's women's problem, she would get behind Senator Alex Antic and fix the Sex Discrimination Act to restore the definition of woman so that women and girls can once again be protected from biological males who think they're women. So kudos to Senator Alex Antic. I'm not holding my breath that Susan Ley will get behind this private senator's bill. This should not be a private senator's bill. It should be a coalition bill with the Liberals and the Nationals right behind it. And if Labor really cared about girls and women, they would get behind it as well. But so enthralled are both sides of politics with the trans, LGBTIQA plus, gender fluid ideology. They just don't have the courage to stand up to that political movement. Now, the other big thing that happened this week in Parliament from the government's point of view was they introduced their legislation that they promised during the election campaign to cut students' HECS debts by 20%. And the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, wrote a little note that he posted on social media. He said, in case you missed it yesterday, we introduced our legislation to cut 20% off every student's HECS debt. Note that Anthony Albanese doesn't know how to use an apostrophe for the possessive form of a word. He goes on to say, average save equals $5,500. Now, this is really nice. All of us love to get free stuff from the government, but the government is in $1 trillion worth of debt, which you and I have to pay off, which these students will have to pay off as they go into the workforce. Now, all he's done by cutting the HECS debt of our students by 20% is then put that debt onto the rest of the population. It's gone on the national credit card, which is $1 trillion. This is unsustainable, folks. It's intergenerational theft, and it should be. This should be the topic of the Parliament coming back from the election, but sadly, it's not. It's a real problem. So that's Anthony Albanese's big boast. Now, the other crazy thing we saw this week was some of the new Labor MPs going into the Parliament to vote on this legislation. Here's what they did on their way in. Folks, we're governed by fools. These are some of the new MPs from the Labor Party who will be sitting in the Parliament over the next 3 years. We're in for a heck of a ride. And look, my prediction, I'm going to make a prediction about the Albanese government. I think their first term was showed them to be the worst government probably in Australia's history. I think even worse than Whitlam's government. They had the disastrous voice referendum. Government spending's out of control. Inflation was out of control. They're doubling down on the whole net zero thing, which I'll talk about in a moment. We saw a similar government like this in New Zealand under Jacinda Ardern. It took the people there 3 or 4 years to sort of work it out. And then Jacinda Ardern realised how unpopular she was, and she got out before she could be voted out. They had the baseball bats out for her. New Zealanders worked her out. Anthony Albanese is of the same ideological far left mindset as New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern. I reckon in this term of Parliament, Australians will start to realise as their electricity bills continue to go through the roof because of net zero, as government debt continues to spiral, as the economy continues to stagnate because of the lack of productivity in it, and taxes continue to go up. I think people are going to work these guys out. And of course, I should have mentioned the social cohesion issues as well. So let's wait and see. But Parliament's off to a start this week. Now, I mentioned net zero. And again, the important things that need to be done in the Parliament are not being done by Susan Ley or Anthony Albanese. They've been done by private members. And Barnaby Joyce has finally broken ranks with his party on this issue of net zero. Now, he's been complaining about it for a long time, rightly so. He has teamed up with his former rival, Michael McCormack, also another former Deputy Prime Minister. And they've both come out this week and said, we're not supporting net zero anymore. Barnaby has produced a private members bill to axe net zero. Now, I think that's really important. Net zero is the policy that is the one that's driving our cost of living through the roof. It's doing economic harm to the nation. It's sending manufacturing offshore. It's the thing that's causing your electricity prices to go through the roof. It's causing the electricity grid to be unstable. We keep getting warnings every summer from the Australian Energy Market Operator to say that the grid is unstable. We're at risk of blackouts. It's hard to believe this, but this is what is happening in modern Australia in our lifetimes. And net zero, with its rollout of solar panels and windmills, and we've seen farmers complaining in the news, rightly so, this week about wind towers the size of James Packer's Crown building at Barangaroo. I mean, it's the tallest building in Australia. We're talking 290 metre high wind towers in farming land around the Yass district. You've got to roll out transmission lines, disperse the transmission. It's incredibly expensive. It all goes onto your electricity bill. We've got abundant coal, gas, uranium in this country, and yet we are driving our electricity through the roof. This is a big deal. Well done to Barnaby and Michael McCormack. They are right to raise this issue. Again, Susan Ley can't work out whether she supports it or not. It's under review. We've got to get away from this policy as quickly as we can. It's doing incredible damage to the country. I also believe Barnaby Joyce owes the nation an apology. I'm glad he's doing what he's doing, but he's the one, when he was Deputy Prime Minister, his National Party room voted to put Scott Morrison on the plane to Glasgow to sign us up to net zero. And that was a disastrous thing for our nation, an act of economic self-harm. So that's net zero. Now, also on the economy this week, we saw a really important report released by the Centre for Independent Studies, written up in the Australian Financial Review, which shows that more than 50% of Australians now rely on the government as their main source of income. This is people who are public servants. Okay, we need public servants, obviously, but we've got way too many of them. And we've got an NDIS, National Disability Insurance Scheme, which is out of control. It's becoming one of the biggest drags on government revenue, tax revenue. All government spending is out of control. We've got half of the population relying on the government. Now, that is just not sustainable for any country of 25 million people to have half the people reliant on the taxpayer for their income. We've got real problems in this country, folks, and this is something to keep an eye on. Again, this is why we're doing this podcast, because this wasn't raised as part of the parliamentary debate this week as Parliament returned. There is no plan in politics to deal with these systemic issues which are dragging our nation down. The other thing that happened this week, there's been a lot, but Israel, of course, has been in the news. The tragedy in Gaza, which is entirely Hamas instigated with their brutal war on Israel, their desire to destroy the state of Israel. But Albanese, coming out this week and criticising Israel all the time. Now, look, Israel's prosecution of the war is not beyond criticism, obviously, but they didn't start this war. And the reason why people are starving in Gaza is because Hamas pilfers the aid that comes in. Israel had to take over the distribution of aid from the corrupt United Nations. Their UN Works and Relief Agency was involved in the October 7 massacre. Some of their staff were sacked for their complicity and involvement. The UN is corrupt, unfortunately, but Israel had to take it over, but Hamas keep trying to pilfer the aid. They want to control the distribution of aid. They want to give it to the rapists and the terrorists and the people who committed the atrocities, their fighters of October 7. And this is obviously untenable. And so Albanese, instead of criticising Hamas, puts the pressure on Israel. And I must say, I was ashamed to be an Australian this week because Hamas came out and praised the Albanese government for its foreign policy. Now, when you've got a bloody terrorist organisation praising your foreign policy, you need to have a good look in the mirror. And this was a very dark day for Australia. One other thing before I bring in Tess Hackett, the issue of human rights for unborn children is a really, really important issue. And this week, Joanna Howe, who is a terrific pro-life advocate, law professor at Adelaide University, you might have seen her work on social media, her advocacy. She's been just highlighting again an issue which has been around for a while, and that's of a baby bonus being paid to women who make a tragic decision to abort late-term babies. Like every abortion, whatever stage of gestation is, of course, a tragedy. But women who abort their babies from 20 weeks plus, it's a very late stage of gestation. A baby was born in the US yesterday at 21 weeks, the youngest to survive at that stage of gestation prematurely. But from 20 weeks, women are eligible for a stillborn baby payment, essentially like a baby bonus for women who suffer a genuine tragedy. Now, of course, aborting your baby at that stage is, of course, a tragedy as well. But there's a payment for an abortion of a baby post 20 weeks gestation. And Joanna Howe is highlighting that again this week in her social media. She helped bring this to public attention back last December. This headline from the Adelaide Advertiser, 4,200 to abort a baby. This is real, folks. This is, again, where our taxpayers' money is going to. You won't hear this being discussed in Parliament this week as the politicians went back. So this is why, again, we've got to have alternative media and get this message out. Well, that's the wrap of the news this week. A lot of stuff happening. You can read more in depth on the Family First Party website, familyfirstparty.org.au. We've blogged about most of these issues, so go there and have a look at more in-depth information there. It's so important that we stay engaged and up to date. Well, it's a real privilege now to bring in Tess Hackett from Western Australia. Tess is a courageous mum. She's a parent who's been a victim of LGBTIQA plus gender fluid ideology, and she's going to join us now and tell us her story. Tess, welcome to the Macquarie Street Political Podcast.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
Tess, you caught my attention this week when your photo was on the front page of the Weekend Australians magazine, and a big in-depth feature article about your family story and so many other families who have been impacted by this ideology. When I saw that cover photo, my heart leapt, because I know a little bit about how difficult it's been for people like yourself to get your story out into the mainstream. Yeah. How did it feel to finally see this, getting the public attention it deserves?
Well, I mean, it was a bit of a shock. I didn't know I was going to be on the cover. I knew I was going to be in the article, but not the cover, so that was a big surprise. But vindicated, I think, is the best word. We've been fighting to be heard for such a long time now. It's heading up to 10 years. I hear story after story after story of the most horrific events, that are happening to parents all around Australia, and nobody wants to hear. We've spoken to different politicians and things. We've been to federal parliament and spoken.
Let's come back to the politicians in a moment. For those who haven't seen the article, just tell us briefly your story and your family's impact on this, and how you've lost a child, essentially.
Well, unfortunately, my daughter was harmed. An activist teacher was teaching the safe schools type, pretty revolting content. It led to her being sexually assaulted. We didn't find out for a little while. When we did find out, the police were not interested in proceeding to investigate at all, despite the person who sexually assaulted her had also almost done, the same to somebody else. We knew there'd been something wrong, so we took her to see a psychologist, and the psychologist sort of called us in one day and said, look, I think, maybe your child is a male trapped in a female body. So this was, sort of early 2016. Nobody, I just thought she was a bit of, insane. I mean, I was a bit annoyed because we'd been paying all this money for, to see her every week and stuff, and here she is sort of suggesting this. So I sort of went, okay, thank you, and sort of we never went back. Shortly after that, I found out about the sexual assault and tried to get her more concrete help in that area. We were seeing a psychologist that specialised in that sort of thing. But, by that time she'd already started looking online. She had one of the people she knew who'd also been almost sexually assaulted by the same person had gone down the transgender path, and, this person's family became what we call the glitter parents. Anything that we say no to, they affirm, they buy the binders, they, come and live with us, we'll look after you, you can be our son, and, all the stuff. And so it was completely activist driven. And then sort of, we had an event one day where she had been on social media in the middle of the night. We had strict rules on social media or, devices in rooms and things like most, responsible families do. And we found her at 3 a.m. talking to this group of people, and she'd broken all the rules, and I said, well, this is it, you've broken the rule, do it again, and we're going to take your devices off you for a period of time. So next night, similar story. And, I said, well, that's it, taking away your mobile and things. You can still have it when you're going, on public transport and stuff, but at home, you've lost it. So, I mean, back in 2016, people still had home phones, and, so it wasn't like she was isolated or anything. It was just that she didn't have her own device, which, I've come to learn is considered to be pretty abusive, a move for a parent to do to their child, even nothing to do with the transgender stuff. But, she sort of, did an SOS for help, and shortly after, a couple of days later, we had somebody come to the door posing as child protection. Came in, my daughter let this person in the house and he said, I'm here to take your son, and I've got a younger son, so, I'm like, what do you mean, and he sort of said, well, he's in danger. And, again, concerned mum, what do you mean he's in danger? What, so yeah, long story short, we worked out that it was
a child that night. Is that right? This person
no,
came to your door?
No. I managed to fight him off. I rang the police. They didn't want to know. They didn't want to help. This person called the police. I managed to get him between them and shoved him out the front door and locked him out of the house and called my husband. So you physically
had to push him out the door.
It was a physical altercation.
And where was he from? Was he from a government agency?
He was from a lobby group called Transfolk.
So what authority did he have to come to your home to say
nothing.
that he'd come to take your son?
Nothing. And I asked him that because when I thought he was child protection still, because he was, in a suit and everything, I said, where's the ID? Where's your ID? Where's your court order? He had nothing, absolutely nothing. And, I didn't even catch on to the trans stuff until I sort of said, well, where are you from? And he said, Transfolk. And I went, oh, hang on. So it's not my son, it's my daughter, and, no way, get the hell out of my house kind of thing. But, so that was pretty awful.
Back to a couple of things that you just mentioned there. That,
sure.
And I don't want to break your flow necessarily, but you mentioned that your daughter had been exposed to the Safe Schools program.
Yes.
Now, I'm familiar with this. Perhaps some of our audience will be, but this is a program which was teaching children. I first came across it in 2015. I think it had been around even a little bit before then.
Yeah.
But teaching children that their gender is fluid. And there was a bunch of curriculum. A group called Minus 18 helped develop it. It was put out even under the Abbott government. I don't think they really knew what was going on, but it was done under their auspices. So your child was exposed to Safe Schools, which taught them that their gender was fluid.
It was unofficial through the school, but it taught them. This activist teacher was really encouraging the kids, even at a very young age sort of thing, young teens, to experiment sexually, to, go and, try things out on the weekend, and they'd come back to school apparently and talk about it and things like this. So, I knew before all of this sort of came to a head that there was something weird, there was weirdness going on, because my daughter would come out with things like, it's not STDs anymore, it's STIs. And you're like, well, what's the difference? And, they're not diseases, just because you've got something, you just go and get, a pill or a potion or, whatever, and you'll be fine. And you kind of go, yeah, but what about all the different things that are, antibiotic resistant? And, and she didn't have an answer for that sort of thing. So, it was. Yeah. So unfortunately, when the sexual assault occurred, this teacher was the first one that she went to and he told her to get over it. He said that put it down to life experience. So despite the fact that he was, mandatory reporting person, he failed completely to report. Later, when I found out accidentally, she'd let him know he was friends with all the kids on Facebook and things like this. So he'd crossed so many lines of professionalism. It was insane. But he chuffed off, so he's gone overseas. So we can't sort of do anything about it.
So when did your daughter then actually make a transition then from being female to something that she's obviously not?
She made a declaration that she was a lesbian first, and so this was probably about July, August of 2016, and I was kind of surprised. I'd had some friends that were lesbians. It kind of didn't particularly worry me at all, really. But the surprise was that she hadn't talked about any girls or anything. She'd been the sort of little girl who, even as a young little girl, had always had, boyfriends and things like this. So had always had interest in boys. So it was kind of surprising. And I sort of said, who is it, And she actually named the person who was the male transitioning to female. Which I sort of said, well, just because this person wants to be known by a girl's name doesn't mean that he's actually a girl. I mean, and I couldn't get my head around that either. And neither could she, surprisingly. She, when she first came to me with that, she said, I don't know why he wants me to call him a girl's name. And I was like, can't give you an answer either, sort of thing. So then it was just maybe a month later, she sort of actually, and it's during dinner time while, everything's happening and stuff, she came up and sort of went, I think I'm a male trapped in a female body. I'm trans. And, I hadn't really even heard the term, really.
How did you feel when she was describing this to you? This is your own daughter. How did that make you feel as a mum, and your husband as well? How did you both respond and deal with this?
Well, shock, really, I didn't know what to say. I thought she meant intersex, as in a sexual development disorder, which is why I actually never include the I in the alphabet soup, because they've got a birth defect. And, for me, I think whatever they need to do to get through life, they need to do that. There should be no shame. And I have actually in my journey met a couple who are true intersex cases, and they want nothing to do with this. They're horrified, So I tried to explain to her, a bit of basic biology. And I've worked in hospital situations and stuff, I know biology, and, and I sort of tried to explain, and she said, no, you don't know anything. That's old biology. I'm like, what on earth is old biology, when it comes to, basic biological sex? I don't understand. So it was at that point that I sort of thought, I really don't know what to say here. I'd gone off and Googled. I was trying not to panic or show any sort of anything sort of thing, just be neutral, be calm, but there was nothing really to Google. So I took her to our doctor, who said, look, I think she needs to go to the gender clinic. He promoted the gender clinic as being somewhere where they do lots of investigation and that sort of thing. So again...
So where was the gender clinic in Perth then? Was that at one of the public
At the Children's Hospital.
At the Children's Hospital.
The main Children's Hospital. Yeah. So... again, with that intersex, sexual development disorder idea, I sort of thought the gender clinic would do blood tests and scans and I don't know. I still didn't understand that.
Did you go with your daughter to these appointments at the gender clinic?
So he did a referral. It took 3 months. So they closed down for a big period over Christmas and stuff. But and that's when the activists all happened and all of this sort of stuff, and the police got involved, and that was a whole circus. So when we actually went to the first letter we got from the gender clinic concerned me, because it was already in this new fake name that I considered a fake name that my daughter had, and it was your son and all this sort of stuff. And I'm thinking, how can you be saying this? You think about it, public hospital systems, why aren't they using the Medicare name, this person in real life doesn't even exist.
How old was your daughter at that stage, Tess? How old was she?
So by the time we'd got to the gender clinic, she just turned 17 because of the waiting period and stuff.
Still a minor.
Except that you're not a minor these days in anyone's books, until
over 16, I think children are allowed to. They're still a minor. Technically, but they're allowed to make their own medical decisions.
That's the thing that I learnt with the trans stuff. There's nothing. So I used to work in a hospital. I'd done theatre bookings and admissions and things. Nothing about this gender ideology was anything to do with anything like normal hospital practice.
How were you made to feel as a parent by the doctors, the medical health practitioners at the gender clinic? How did they make you feel?
Like garbage. I can't stress that enough. It was already even before that, the social workers at the hospital, when the activists came, you're dead naming. I hadn't heard of the name, of the term. I'm like, what's dead naming? Calling your child her birth name is dead naming. You're abusive. Why am I abusive? Because you're dead naming and you're misgendering. I compared gender ideology to anorexia, and because, I sort of saw that as very similar concepts, something that you think you are, but obviously you're not. You can't, you don't go offering, anorexics diet pills and gastric banding. So why would you go kind of along with this? It was insanity, and I knew that there was issues. So from then, I was super cautious with the gender clinic. And so the first appointment was with a clinic nurse. So there was my daughter and I and this clinic nurse who completely, welcome, use your son all the time, the new name and everything. She gave my daughter a consent form. I didn't realise it was a consent form. Went through like the most surface level side effects, things like oh, well, your red blood cell count might go up, but, that's okay. Just donate blood every month and you'll be fine. And I'm sort of thinking, knowing a little bit about human biology, hang on a minute, high blood cells can mean liver damage and stuff, but they didn't talk about any of that sort of thing.
So Tess, what did they prescribe your daughter then? What was the process of transition that they offered her as a 17-year-old?
That first appointment, before we even saw the psychiatrist, the endocrinologist, anyone, it was just a clinic nurse. She sort of, and this was the worst bit, that, you're trying to keep your child on side, and she looked over at me and she said, so what about if we start your son on puberty blockers today? And I was like, hang on a minute, again, where's the blood test?
At age 17, they're saying.
Yeah. And it was really confronting. And I said, well, hang on, from what I know about puberty blockers, because I had looked a little bit into it and I knew that they were dangerous and, all of this, I said, she's already gone through puberty, all of this stuff, like why puberty blockers? I don't sort of understand. And she sort of went, well, I guess you're right. We could maybe just start on cross-sex hormones. How do you feel about that?
Now that's testosterone, isn't it? Yes. So straight away they're saying, let's give your daughter puberty blockers, even though she's gone through puberty at 17, which would be right. Yeah. And then she's saying cross-sex hormones. We want to inject your daughter with testosterone.
Yeah. So with my daughter sitting next to me trying to keep her on side, I'm sort of thinking, what do I say to this without being accused of abuse, without hysterics from this clinic nurse, without my daughter, going off the deep end and stuff. And I sort of went, well, like we're into natural health, I cook from scratch, all of this sort of stuff. Like, I'm not comfortable with giving her some sort of medication that before she's even had any testing, And, I mean, she did look at me funny, which I didn't understand, but it was because there is no testing. So the next appointment, we saw the psychiatrist, a psychologist, and I think a social worker, and we saw them together and separately. And honestly, how to make a gender clinic psychiatrist just about make their head spin around, use the anorexic comparison. Like, honestly, I thought this lady was going to combust. How dare you suggest that it's a mental illness, all of this sort of stuff. But it just kind of went on from there. So, I mean, I just kept saying no. And they said, look, to my daughter, look, because your mum and dad won't agree with this, there's nothing we can do. You have to wait. In WA at the time, you had to go through family court to get approval. And the wait's so long, you'll just have to wait until you're 18 and go to the adult gender clinic sort of thing. So they kept seeing her, but there was one more appointment. I went with her, but that was it sort of thing. So we managed to hold off until she'd run away. She'd run away sort of a couple of months later because she was so furious with us for saying no.
So she received no medication, no cross-sex hormones while she was with you. So she ran away from home.
Yeah. So the she met and moved in with the trans activists, and in hindsight, they kept her for a couple of weeks, but she was too hard. I mean, mentally, she was really, really unwell. She was a very traumatised teen, from the sexual assault trauma. I mean, you could see with the way she, her bedroom was just... terrible. There was so much it was obvious, cutting herself, doing everything and stuff. But they went and dumped her in a homeless shelter.
Right. So then she went on. What did she eventually end up receiving in terms of so-called gender-affirming care, which is the euphemism they use?
Yep.
So she went on to testosterone. So how has it affected her?
Well, she was on I found out now, massively high dose. Bernard Lane has written about some of the strengths of some of the testosterone that some girls have been on, and they get blood clots and stuff.
This is to make their voices go deep and to develop facial hair and
so
the like.
Within about a month, her voice had changed completely. She rang me and her voice was unrecognisable. I thought it was a prank call, and I think that was one of the hardest things. To not know your own child's voice is so distressing. The facial hair came on a bit more gradually. But, everything we saw, she was so heavily involved with the activists. The only time she sort of called me was when she'd been kicked out of accommodation for various reasons and stuff. So, I mean, I'd go running because, I loved her and I was worried for her and things like that. So it kind of sort of went on. But then she was in a mental health place for a month, a solid month. she'd broken up with this boy who was also transitioning, and that improved things. She actually, I was able to see, and she picked up a lot. We actually saw traces of, our old daughter sort of thing. But then after she checked out, she got back with this boy, and that was it.
Did your daughter end up, going through any surgical procedures?
Yes, yep. So she had a GoFundMe that I'd kept an eye on and stuff. So just in the midst of COVID, when all other elective surgery was cancelled, she'd done a post on her GoFundMe saying that she finally had the money. She'd listed the surgeon's name and all that sort of stuff. And, I knew of the surgeon, so I wrote to the surgeon. I said, look, this is her history. She'd done this weird website where she states that she's an alien and she's got all these disabilities and all this. She was mentally so unwell. And I said to him, please don't do this. Please encourage her to go and have, some mental health care, first and stuff. He unfortunately printed everything and gave them to her, so that was the end of our relationship. I haven't heard from her since. But she did send
when she went through the surgery?
20.
Yes, 20.
She was 20, yeah.
So she had, and sorry if this is, traumatic.
That's all right.
I think you're very courageous, and of course we're seeing on the screen, again, the cover of the Weekend Australian magazine where you've told your story along with many other families as well, finally getting into the mainstream media. But your daughter at the age of 20 has a double mastectomy so that she can present as a man.
Yes.
Now that's obviously irreversible.
It is, and it was devastating. Very hard thing. Surgery is so final, people sort of say, and I know a lot of the surgeons doing it, if she changes her mind, she can always get implants. But, with all the studies and studying and stuff, I've looked into it since. And from what I've learned and people that I've spoken to, the scarring is so big that what they do for the surgery, they can't get implants. I've had a couple of close friends who've had to have breasts off recently for cancer. And, their scars are minuscule, like almost invisible, and even then the skin's sometimes not flexible enough, doesn't have enough give for implants or anything, so it's not reversible.
What's your and your husband's relationship with your daughter like today?
Non-existent.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have lost a child essentially. Now let's hope and pray for a reconciliation. But this is this has had a and for those, a number of people have been joining us throughout this live stream. Yeah. But you mentioned earlier as we started this discussion that your daughter obviously had a terrible sexual assault. So there was trauma in her world.
Yeah.
She was exposed to the safe schools. So-called safe schools program in her school, which teaches children about LGBT issues and gender fluidity. So there's a clear pathway through this, and then the gender clinics have offered this gender affirming care.
Yes,
a euphemism for mutilating a young woman's body.
The thing is that, I started looking into safe schools. We held a protest rally with a friend in Melbourne who had a son who'd been shown an anal sex video in class. I don't know if you're allowed to say that on a live, but anyway, he did at 12 years old, and it affected him so badly. So we held a protest. We met a lot of people. I started a parent support group for parents like me. I've spoken to hundreds, if not probably thousands now, of parents literally all over the world. We've got a solid group in Australia, and that the stories that come out of their kids with, actual disabilities where their mental capacity is much lower than their physical age, being able to make these decisions. And how can they understand the consequences, And then we've got this whole new lot now who are also coming out as trans disabled. You talked about NDIS and stuff. We've got kids who are being given electric wheelchairs and things when, before their trans declaration, there was absolutely nothing wrong with them. NDIS support to keep them, clean their houses and do all this sort of stuff. And
Tess, you've become someone who has become a resource for hundreds of parents like you throughout Australia and even overseas. And I was at an event last night here in Sydney with Kirralie Smith from Binary, Jude, who's one of the other parents like yourself who has lost a child to trans ideology. What has been the response from the politicians to parents like yourself? I know you've done a lot of lobbying, and this has been a 10-year journey for you.
Yeah, it has.
And we're only just starting to see it break through into the
Yeah.
mainstream media as
Yeah.
of last weekend. I mean, it's so frustrating.
Yeah.
Where are the politicians on this?
WA Liberals are pretty good. As a whole, federal and state, we've spoken a lot to them and they've been receptive, which has been wonderful. There was a group of 4 mums, myself included, who managed to go to federal parliament at the end of, I think it was 2022 or 2023, I can't remember now, but we spoke to about 17 different politicians. Peter Dutton was one of them, Pauline Hanson, Malcolm Roberts, Gerard Rennick. We met one Labor
guys have been terrific. Paul
they have
moved a number of motions in the Senate, which I have to say, and I take your point about the WA Liberals. Libby Mettam, the former opposition leader,
we've become good friends.
She was the first politician in Australia to say that she was going to ban puberty blockers. That was electrifying.
That was from a chance meeting with her, and I take chance meetings wherever. It's the scariest thing for me. I'm not someone who thrives on attention or seeking people out, and yet I just take the bull by the horns now. And it was a chance meeting, and I said, I'd really like to talk to you about this, and she listened, which was incredible.
Yeah. Well, you made history by that chance meeting because no other leader of a political party has said it's such a shame she's no longer in that position.
I know, I'm devastated. But
Pauline Hanson has been terrific.
She's amazing.
Moved a number of Senate motions or motions for inquiries into what the gender clinics are doing. And look, I have to say, other Liberals voted this down. People like Simon Birmingham and Andrew Bragg and Maria Kokocevic. I have butchered her name. It's a difficult name.
Well,
but
Andrew,
the Liberals, they're the ones who've been voting it down, along with many Labor, of course.
There are reasons. So I spoke to one politician. I'm not going to mention names because I don't know if I should, but one particular politician who has voted against it, I've met with him sort of nearly 3-4 months ago now, and he explained why he's actually on our side, but it's something to do, and I'm not a politician, so I don't really understand. It's something to do with because Labor's in power and there's, the Greens are around and, Labor and Greens have got this in their policy documents and stuff.
They have,
that what Pauline's proposing isn't going to work for a decent inquiry, and so that's why he keeps voting against it.
I don't buy that, Tess. Look, I've been around politics a long time as well.
I don't know.
I just think that's a lame excuse. Now, please don't get me wrong. I think good on you for engaging these guys, and you've got to build a relationship.
But saying that, this particular politician was probably the most educated. You could tell, you can tell now when someone knows what that they're talking about, and he was the most probably educated
we need to see
on
some
this.
Courage on the floor of the Parliament.
Courage courage is the big thing. Pauline promised us that she would do this when we met her in Parliament. So that was, we had some horrific stories. We met with Andrew Bragg. He was against.
He's another one who he's voted against these inquiries and
he was totally against it because he said it would split the floor and he didn't want that to happen. I mean, but we had a mum whose son had gone and had his penis removed here in Australia after 3 months of a trans declaration, and he was so ignorant to it that he sort of said, well, is that type of surgery reversible? And you kind of go, well, how could it be reversible?
What an ignorant look. I'm sorry. I
probably shouldn't say that.
I'm happy to be proven wrong. No, you're absolutely right. Look, I'm on the warpath against these so-called moderate Liberals. I mean, it was very distressing during the federal election campaign. Even when the UK Supreme Court came out and defined a woman, and Peter Dutton squibbed it. You had
he was a
like
massive
Dave
disappointment.
Sharma and I think even Andrew Bragg himself saying, no, we're not going to change the Sex Discrimination Act. I mentioned that at the start of the show. Alex Antic is now putting up a private senator's bill to change
he's
sex
wonderful.
discrimination, but he's wonderful at it. But again, Susan Ley is not behind it, and
she's
I'll
not.
bet London to a brick that she won't support it, and this will just die on the notice paper.
She's someone that I have spoken to. Yeah, I have spoken to Susan a couple of times, and some of my colleagues, friends and stuff who are into this as well have spoken to her, and she just went, well, that's not a federal issue. Okay, how is it not a federal issue? I'm sorry, again, not a politician, just a mum, but, you kind of argue with her about it, but she doesn't. Not keen to sort of even hear. There's a lot of courage that's needed.
Well, I think you've shown incredible courage, Tess, and I've
thank
seen
you.
Jude speak.
Yeah, she's
your story,
amazing too.
Jude's, and many others are written up in a book called Devastated by my good friend Kiralee Smith of the Binary organisation. And I'd encourage everyone to go to the Binary website and buy a copy of that book. It's around about $30, $35. Your story's in there.
Yeah.
Your story is also in the Weekend Australian magazine from last weekend.
Yeah.
But Tess, how important was it for you after a decade of lobbying, trying to get politicians to take this seriously, trying to get the media to actually see this being given the dignity that it deserves?
It was incredible. And I've had so many emails and stuff. I've been inundated with emails. I've been inundated with medical professionals, and I'm not going to go into details because I'm not going to out anyone, but significant medical professionals say, this is the most horrific, thing. This whole dive into the ROGD phenomenon is so wrong. It was amazing. Vindicated. I've lost friends. I've lost extended family. I've lost in-laws. I've lost, so many people. And all of the parents have. Anyone standing up against this has. But, you do make new friends. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Life does go on somehow. I'm not really sure how. It just, but it's the daily choice to have a little bit of courage. And courage breeds courage. And so, if you say something, it's amazing how many people all of a sudden will go, well, actually, I saw this, so, yeah.
Tess, since that article appeared last weekend, has there been any other media following this up with you? Normally a big story like that would generate even more media.
No.
See, that's extra. That to me says there's still a media blackout on this issue.
I've had, what's it called, Spotlight show was going to do.
Channel 7, yes. They did a good report this a while ago. Yeah.
So they didn't want to include my story at the time because it was so complex that they wanted to do, with a couple of other parents and stuff like that. But that just sort of fizzled out. Over the 9.5, I've been interviewed for, I think, the Herald Sun. I've been interviewed for other papers before, but it just fizzles out. Even this interview, it took a long time. It started in January. I don't hold my breath. I kind of go, okay, well, it's not happening now, so I'll keep going and keep trying. And then all of a sudden it was like, well, there it is. So, very,
Tess,
very grateful.
The good news is this issue is slowly starting to turn, and you and I are discussing off air some news that broke yesterday from New Zealand, and we might even have a screen grab of that. But the New Zealand government is now banning biological males from competing in women's sport in New Zealand and going to the Olympics. And Winston Peters, who you can see on the screen there, he's from a minor party called New Zealand First. He's in coalition with the Nationals, but he's been terrific on this issue. He's on a war against the woke agenda, and so he's forced the sports minister to back down. Now, this is a big breakthrough because here in Australia, we couldn't even get Scott Morrison's government, let alone Anthony Albanese's, to do the right thing by women's sport.
No.
So, how does this make you feel when you see a headline like that?
It's amazing. It's sad. We've watched. Over the last couple of years, we had the WPATH files came out, and we sort of thought, this is great. It shows the perversion and stuff, and it was nothing.
I know what that is. I know what WPATH is.
Sorry, it's a World Professional Organisation for Transgender Health. So the WPATH broke with whistleblowers talking about how. The latest one includes, castration kink and all of this sort of stuff as a way to care for people that are identifying.
These are the so-called medical standards that are informing our guidelines for gender affirmation care here in Australia.
And this is
Michelle
what
Telfer at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, she follows these WPATH guidelines, which have been completely shown to be generated by political activists, not by medical people, and yet this is what's informing the way that children like your daughter have been treated here in Australia. It's
and the parents, because this is the thing. Parents get accused of abuse, and so there's court cases and things. They lose custody of their children, their other children and things. There's so much that impacts of the fact that we get called abusive for asking for a second opinion. And the Australian Standard actually state on one of the pages that it was a matter of opinion, and it's not based on scientific fact. It's a matter of opinion, and that's how it's all written stuff. That's in there in the standards. But
let's just talk about those Australian standards, Tess, because earlier this year, the Health Minister, Mark Butler, just before the federal election, announced that there would be a review of these Australian standards. And again, I think brought on by this gender clinic in Cairns in Queensland that was found to be prescribing cross-sex hormones to children, to minors, without parental consent. It's a big scandal. The Queensland government sort of has put a pause on temporary ban on puberty blockers under Tim Nicholls, the health minister. And then Mark Butler was sort of embarrassed into, well, let's have a review. But he's slow walking it, isn't it? It's not going to report until 2027.
For 5 minutes, the people in the know fighting this were excited for about 5 minutes, until you start looking and you sort of Transcend Health Australia, all of those sort of groups were celebrating, saying they'd been contacting Mark Butler about wait times, and so you kind of go, well, hang on, this isn't an inquiry for us. This is an inquiry to get more kids onto blockers. I mean, we had approached Mark Butler, we had approached the previous health minister, we had approached, again, I better not say names, but one of the medical people in federal parliament and things like that, who sort of promised an inquiry back in 2022, never happened. They don't care. They don't care. And, I mean, look at what's happened in Queensland. I mean, I've got parents in Queensland. Their kids are still being able to access hormones because doctors online are selling them online behind the blockout. So,
well, let's talk about Queensland. I've got another graphic which we might put up on the screen. And now, this person here is one of my heroes, Dr. Gillian Spencer, child psychiatrist.
She's amazing.
Yeah, and you obviously know who she is.
Yeah, well.
And some of our viewers will know who've been following this issue. But she was stood down about 2 years ago from her role as a child psychiatrist at the Queensland Children's Hospital at South Bank in Brisbane. The gentleman on the right of screen is Tim Nicholls, the health minister. Now, Gillian's case, she's currently suing Queensland Health through the Fair Work Commission, I understand, and the Human Rights Law Alliance, terrific law firm, is representing her. But the LNP have been in power since October last year, a Conservative government. Now, the first thing a Conservative government should have done was reinstate Dr. Gillian Spencer, because she blew the whistle on the harm that her gender clinic was doing to children in fast-tracking them through the gender transition, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, etc. Yet Tim Nicholls has done nothing. And he's a conservative, supposedly conservative. And look, there's a huge number of Christians elected to the Crucifili government who should know better. I just don't understand why there's no agitation. And that little brochure on screen is a Protecting Children in Gender Medicine seminar to be held next Wednesday, the 30th of July at 6 p.m. at Hope Centre, 35 Thompson Street, Bowen Hills. I actually used to go to church at Hope Centre when I lived in Brisbane. I know the facility well. I'm glad the church is hosting that. But I'd encourage everyone to get along there next Wednesday, support Gillian Spencer and find out what the heck Tim Nicholls is doing, why he's doing nothing about this. I just don't understand. If only, he'd pick up the phone and talk to Libby Medham.
Yes, that's right. Well, I mean, interestingly, with Libby Medham, her primary vote for, her own electorate was something like 70%. We handed out how to vote cards and stuff for the Liberals for election.
So this wasn't a vote loser for her. No. She spoke. She made national headlines saying she was going to ban puberty blockers, protect children when she was WA opposition leader, and she had a 70% primary vote. Most politicians would kill for that. That's unbelievable.
I mean, everyone was sort of people talked about it. We love Libby, we love what she's saying. The consensus, there was other factors, but, on a state level, they really liked her.
This is a vote winner, isn't it? I mean, remember the US presidential election last year? Donald Trump, love him or hate him, I actually think his policies are pretty good, but he's been very clear on this issue. The most effective political advertisement, and all the pundits are saying this, was his ad that said Kamala Harris is for they, them, but I'm for you. That was the killer ad which won him those swing states, helped get him the popular vote. Kamala Harris was all in for the trans lobby. Trump said, no, we're going to do males and females, and he's made good on that.
And he's doing it,
He's doing it, and yet our politicians here are doing nothing.
And it's, some of them plead ignorance, and yet, I mean, I know hundreds of people around Australia who did a massive letter writing campaign to the Liberals to say, here's your chance. It's there on a platter for you. You've got, all of this information. We were also sending out information about the Australian Plastic Surgeons Association, who'd made deals with Albo to have something like 21 or 24 of the gender-affirming surgeries paid for by Medicare. In a government that can't afford a lot of anything, there's unemployed, the health system's revolting. WA is just a mess, and we're going to be paying, for phalloplasty surgery for people so that they can.
No, this is not, and certainly shouldn't be paying for children or for anyone. Tess, our time is pretty much up. I really appreciate you sharing so honestly. It's been very raw, your own personal experience, to share on a podcast like this, which is going to live on the internet, and people can, I hope they'll watch it. And but I hope it just plays a part also in helping elevate your story and those of hundreds of other Australian parents whose lives have been devastated, whose families have been torn apart by rainbow political ideology. This has been
there's so many parents that just can't speak out because of court cases, because of, they've got younger siblings that they're scared will be taken away and things like that. Yeah. And that's why the ones of us that do speak out we represent everyone. We've got an army of parents behind us, supporting us, because they just can't speak.
Well, Tess, keep speaking out. Thank you so much for joining us
Thanks
today
for having
on Macquarie
me.
Street. It's been a real joy and a pleasure.
Yep.
And, I just trust this is just the beginning. And I hope and pray there'll be a reconciliation for your family and for Jude's family who I met last night and so many others. So thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
Before we go, I just want to mention the Family First Party conference coming up on the 5th and 6th of September this coming September. We're going to be discussing this issue that we've been talking about with Tess today. We've got Rachel Wong from Women's Forum Australia coming to speak. She's been on the forefront of the girls' and women's rights movement when it comes to pushing back on the rainbow political ideology. We're going to be talking about energy policy. We've got Jared Holland from the Page Research Centre. He will completely debunk the idea that net zero is something that is of any good to our nation. We've got Professor Ian Plimer, who's been a skeptic of so-called climate change ideology. He's a geologist. He is brilliant. We've got Family First's own Roseanne Masters, who's a passionate pro-life person. She's going to be talking about human rights for unborn babies. We've got so many speakers. Bella de Brera from the Institute of Public Affairs talking about education, how they are brainwashing your children from early childhood right through to university. We've got the speakers talking about the issues which the political parties will not talk about. So please encourage you to register. Early bird registrations close at the end of July. Go to familyfirstparty.org.au. Have a look under Get Involved. Look for the events tab in the drop-down menu there. You'll see information about the conference. Well, thank you so much for being part of today's podcast. This is something we're looking to do weekly to get going again, and I'll have more information about it. But it's been a pleasure having your company, and, of course, an absolute privilege having Tess Hackett with us. Until next week, keep speaking up. God bless.